Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt a strange tug, as if they held a secret that could change everything? That's how it was with him. The way his gaze lingered a moment too long, the casual touch that burned through layers of denial. At first, I thought I was imagining things, guilty for even entertaining the thought. But that day on the farm, under the sprawling expanse of sky and the hum of cicadas, everything unraveled. It started innocently enough. My husband's best friend, Marcus, had come over to help fix the fencing by the barn. We were a tight-knit group, or so I thought, inseparable since college, when Marcus and my husband dreamed up this idyllic farm life we now shared. But as the sun dipped low, casting shadows across the fields, I found myself alone with Marcus, and the air between us felt different. My name is Clara, and for the past 6 years, I've lived the life I thought I always wanted. My husband Luke and I bought the farm shortly after our wedding, a sprawling patch of rolling hills and golden fields. It was Luke's dream, really, a childhood vision of hard work and simpler days, and I threw myself into it, hoping to make it my dream, too. The days were often long, the work exhausting, but at night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset together, I told myself it was worth it. Then there was Marcus. Marcus wasn't just Luke's best friend. He was like a brother to him. They'd met in college, bonding over shared goals and wild adventures that they loved to reminisce about. Marcus came to visit often, always ready to lend a hand on the farm or share a drink at the end of the day. I thought of him as family, at least, that's what I told myself. The thing about Marcus was that he had a certain charm. He was magnetic in a way Luke wasn't, easygoing, always quick with a joke, and deeply confident in his own skin. Where Luke's quiet devotion often came across as reserved, Marcus filled every room with energy, a constant contrast to the hard-working, steady life Luke and I had built together. It was a blistering summer that year, the kind that seemed to bake the very earth beneath our feet. The fields stretched endlessly, their shimmering heat waves painting the horizon with a mirage of distant coolness. The barn stood stubbornly at the edge of the property, its weathered wood bleached pale by years of sun, and in its shade, I could almost feel a reprieve from the unforgiving glare. Marcus had come by to help Luke repair the fencing before the livestock broke free, a favor I didn't think twice about back then. The three of us worked side by side, the scent of sweat and freshly cut grass thick in the air. Marcus had that familiar way about him, cracking jokes as he tugged at stubborn posts, tossing quick winks my way when Luke wasn't looking. It made me smile, though I scolded myself for it. But as the hours wore on and Luke wandered off to check another corner of the property, I found myself alone with Marcus. We worked quietly for a while, the tension unspoken but heavy between us. There was something about the way he stood close, too close, brushing against me as he reached for tools or leaning in when he spoke. My chest tightened with something I didn't want to name, but I couldn't shake the way his presence stirred something in me I hadn't felt in years. The afternoon stretched on, the oppressive heat making every second heavier. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, my hand trembling just enough to betray the storm inside me. Marcus was standing by the fence post, hammering away with rhythmic precision, the muscles in his arms flexing with each strike. I glanced toward the distant field, scanning for Luke, but he was nowhere in sight. "You all right, Clara?" Marcus's voice broke through the quiet, his tone casual, though there was an undercurrent to it I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, just tired," I said quickly, avoiding his gaze. Marcus leaned on the handle of his hammer, the corner of his mouth twitching into a grin. "Farm life wearing you down? You don't seem like the type to give up so easily." I stiffened, caught off guard by the implication. "I'm not giving up," I replied, a little too defensively. "Relax." He chuckled, raising his hands as if in surrender. "I'm just saying. You don't always seem happy here, that's all." The words hit me harder than I expected, maybe because they echoed something I'd been afraid to admit to myself. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing." He shrugged, but his gaze held mine a moment too long. "Just, you deserve to be happy, Clara. That's all I'm saying." My stomach tightened. I should have walked away, changed the subject, anything. But instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, the heat of his words lingering on my skin like the sun overhead. "I am happy," I said, though even I wasn't convinced by the wavering tone in my voice. Marcus stepped closer, closing the gap between us. His voice softened, carrying a dangerous intimacy that made my pulse quicken. "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're just surviving." The air between us felt charged, as though the heat from the day had built to an unbearable pressure. I tried to laugh it off, a hollow sound escaping my lips. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Marcus didn't back down. "I see the way Luke looks at this farm. It's his whole world. And I see the way you look at it. Like it's a cage." His words hit too close to the truth. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but the lump rising in my throat kept the words at bay. "Marcus," I began, my voice trembling. He took another step closer, his hand brushing against mine as if by accident. The touch was electric, igniting something I couldn't quite name. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, Clara. But don't you think you deserve more?" "More?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "More than being taken for granted. More than feeling alone, even when someone's right next to you." His words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. The truth in his words scared me more than I wanted to admit. I took a step back, needing to put distance between us, but Marcus reached out and gently caught my arm. "Don't," I said quickly, though my voice lacked conviction. He let go, his touch lingering like a brand. "Clara, I..." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice breaking. "Please." "I can't." Marcus stepped back, his expression conflicted, a mix of regret and something deeper, something I didn't want to name. The rest of the afternoon passed in strained silence. I avoided his gaze, focusing on the work, though every brush of his arm or glimpse of his profile sent my thoughts spiraling. What was I doing? Luke trusted him. I trusted him. And yet, there was a part of me, an undeniable part, that had started to wonder. When we finally called it a day, Marcus stayed behind to help Luke clean up the tools while I retreated to the house, my mind a whirlwind. I splashed cool water on my face in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the small window above the sink. The person looking back at me seemed like a stranger, someone teetering on the edge of something dangerous. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking it. But deep down, I knew the truth. Marcus's words had unlocked something buried, something I wasn't ready to confront. And now, I wasn't sure I could put it back. The next morning started like any other. Luke was up at dawn, his boots thudding across the wooden floors as he went about his usual routine. By the time I joined him outside, the sun had just started to rise, painting the fields in hues of gold and amber. I kept my distance, finding tasks to busy myself with while avoiding the barn and, by extension, Marcus. But fate had other plans. Mid-morning, Luke mentioned that Marcus was out by the back pasture repairing a section of the fence. I froze mid-step, my heart sinking. My first instinct was to stay away, to keep to the house, where I could avoid another encounter. But the water troughs needed filling, and they were right in the direction of the back pasture. As I approached, I saw Marcus leaning on the fence post, shirtless in the rising heat, his back to me. For a moment, I considered turning around. But something compelled me forward, a mix of trepidation and the magnetic pull I had been battling since the day before. He turned when he heard me approach, wiping sweat from his brow. "Clara." His voice was calm, even warm, but there was an edge in his eyes that told me he'd been thinking about yesterday just as much as I had. "Morning," I muttered, looking anywhere but at him. "You avoiding me?" he asked, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, though his tone was more serious than playful. "I'm not avoiding anyone," I replied quickly, the defensive edge in my voice betraying me. Marcus stepped closer, his brow furrowing. "You're a terrible liar, you know that?" I didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, until finally, Marcus spoke again. "Look, about yesterday." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Whatever you're about to say, Just don't. But Marcus didn't listen. I can't stop thinking about you, Clara. I know I shouldn't, but I do. His words were a punch to the gut, not because they surprised me, but because they echoed the very thing I'd been trying to suppress. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him he was out of line, but no words came. I see the way you look at me, he continued, stepping closer. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm imagining it. You are wrong, I said, though my voice shook. Marcus stared at me, his eyes searching mine as if daring me to keep lying. And then, to my horror, he whispered, Luke doesn't see you the way I do. He doesn't know what he has. The words hung in the air like a grenade, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream at him, to slap him for crossing a line, but instead, I stood frozen, his words digging into the deepest, darkest parts of my fears. Stop, I finally managed, my voice trembling. You deserve to be with someone who makes you feel alive, he said, his voice soft, almost pleading. Marcus, please, I whispered, tears threatening to spill. Before I could stop him, he took my hand in his. His touch was warm, familiar, and I hated how much I wanted to hold on. Tell me you don't feel it too, he said, his voice breaking. And I'll leave. I'll walk away right now. My throat tightened, the weight of his words pressing down on me. But in that moment, a single thought rose above the chaos in my mind. What am I doing? I yanked my hand away as if his touch burned. This is wrong, I said, choking on the words. I love Luke. He's my husband. The raw pain in Marcus's eyes cut through me like a blade, but I forced myself to look away. I'm sorry, he said after a moment, his voice barely audible. I shouldn't have. No, I interrupted, wiping my eyes. We both know this can't happen. Marcus nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of unspoken words. For what it's worth, he said, his voice heavy with regret, I never meant to hurt anyone. I turned and walked away without another word, the ache in my chest deepening with every step. The truth had finally been laid bare, and though it hurt to confront it, I knew it was a line I couldn't afford to cross. My marriage might not have been perfect, but it was real, and I wasn't ready to destroy it for a moment of fleeting temptation. Still, as I returned to the farmhouse, a single question lingered in my mind. Why didn't it feel like enough? In the days that followed, I did everything I could to repair the cracks I hadn't even noticed in my marriage. I focused on Luke, his laugh, his quiet strength, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. He was a good man, a devoted husband, and yet, for reasons I still struggled to fully admit, I had let myself waver. Marcus left the farm that weekend, citing another job he needed to get to. Luke wasn't fazed. Marcus had always been a bit of a drifter, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of his departure. As his truck disappeared down the gravel road, I stood by the window longer than I needed to, feeling relief and guilt mingle in equal measure. Luke came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. You've seemed quiet lately, he said gently. I hesitated before turning to face him. Just a lot on my mind, I replied. You're not overworking yourself, are you? His concern was genuine, his eyes searching mine. I shook my head and forced a smile. No, nothing like that. He kissed my forehead, and as I leaned into his embrace, I promised myself that I would do better. Not for him, but for us. But some promises are easier to make than they are to keep. The memory of Marcus lingered like a stubborn shadow, his words replaying in my mind at the quietest moments. You deserve to feel alive. I didn't know what that meant for my future, or if it was something I would ever stop wrestling with. What I did know was that life is messy. Love isn't a clear line, and desire doesn't care about vows or loyalty. It creeps in when you least expect it, whispering things you don't want to hear. As I stood there, watching Luke go about his day as if nothing had changed, I wondered if I'd dodged a bullet, or if I was simply postponing the inevitable. Sometimes, I think we don't choose our temptations. We only choose what to do with them. And maybe, for now, that was enough.